fuck you. My business depends on all of you. And I want to make sure that all of you are doing your fucking jobs. Everyone's going to be looking at everyone else.
Hi guys, welcome back to my channel. My name is Louisa. If you're new, don't forget to subscribe, and if you're coming back, welcome back. And today I wanted to talk about what you just saw in the little snippet at the start, which is a documentary that just came out on Netflix called Escaping Twin Flames. The documentary is about what the documentary makers allege is a new cult, which is run by a married couple called Jeff and Shalia Ayan. And the community online is known as Twin Flames Universe. In the documentary, there's footage of the leader Jeff saying that he guarantees that he can help someone find their true love, their soulmate, their twin flame, which is a pretty bold statement to make. And you might be wondering, what exactly do you have to pay for someone to find your ultimate perfect love for you? And that would be apparently the highest price that they have had listed on their website is $8,888 for the full course. Almost $9,000 US. The documentary, which is available on Netflix, builds the case that not only is this a financial scam, but also a cult. In terms of being a financial scam, what they uncover is that a lot of the people that work for them are either unpaid or underpaid. They specifically became a church entity so that they didn't have to pay people, they could make people work as volunteers. The leaders themselves live in a mansion and drive a Porsche Cayenne. So it doesn't seem as though money is really the issue, it's more the issue that they want the money for themselves. It's also alleged and portrayed quite well in the documentary that the leaders exert an enormous amount of control over their members, which is very much the pattern of a cult, to the extent that they have actually managed to convince some women to transition into men. And from what I have gathered from the evidence that is available, some women have gone to the stage of having top surgery. Now, these are people who have never had any history, any prior gender dysphoria or gender confusion. So they were perfectly happy being female, and it was because of the insistence of the leader that they actually transitioned. There are also some examples of the leader pressuring women into same-sex relationships when neither of them have ever been gay. And it seems like, from what can be gleaned, that essentially, because they're guaranteeing that people will find love, they kind of have to artificially create love. And in a group which is predominantly populated by women, it's kind of hard to do if they're looking for the opposite gender. But when the leaders have to consider the bottom line and their profit margin and retaining the loyal supporters who are paying them, then they have to somehow produce results. So this begs the question of, what exactly is a twin flame, and why would people go to the extent of parting with thousands of dollars and transitioning gender and being in a relationship that they have no actual interest in, unless there's something there that is very attractive to them? Before I explain what a twin flame is, I should probably tell you a bit about my own background. So, as you may know if you've seen some of my previous videos, I am a psychology student. I finished my bachelor's and I'm working on postgraduate study. And I am also a Christian, but what I was before I was a Christian was a tarot reader. I started out in mediumship and I went on to study the occult and to study Wicca and witchcraft. And so I also studied tarot. And part of studying tarot is to watch a lot of other people do tarot and to get familiar with what the cards are, what they mean, that kind of thing. And so I watched a lot of YouTube videos on tarot, and I studied a lot of astrology and things like that. So one of the things that came up very frequently, and if you have ever been down this path or if you are currently on that path, then you will know that one of the main things that comes up in online tarot readings and in astrology reports and things like that is the concept of a twin flame. The theory about a twin flame is that every soul is split into two halves, the masculine and the feminine. And then those two halves are reincarnated over and over again throughout multiple lifetimes. And they are always destined to find each other throughout every lifetime. And because it's based on a lot of Eastern mysticism, there's a lot of like Buddhism and Hinduism kind of wrapped up in the concept of a twin flame. But it's kind of like taking the concept of a soulmate and then pumping it full of steroids, because this person isn't just a soulmate, this person is literally the other half of your soul. And in the mythology of the twin flame, there's a lot of karmic baggage that tends to be involved. So you've had supposedly previous lifetimes with this person, and so there's a lot of water under the bridge before you've even actually met them, in theory. And the idea is that you're supposed to figure out this karmic baggage through your relationship and to reach what they call twin flame union, which is like perfect harmony with the other half of your soul. So because there's this kind of concept, people like Jeff and Shalia can say to their followers that, oh, if your twin flame is treating you this way, then it's essentially you treating yourself this way, and what do you need to work on in order to stop treating yourself this way? So you can imagine that in an abusive relationship, there's a lot of victim blaming and internalizing the things that you're experiencing as though it is your own fault. So is the whole thing just a scam? Are tarot readers and astrologists and people who set themselves up as New Age gurus and spiritualists, are they all just scammers? Well, the answer is no. Most of them really believe what they're saying and really believe what they are teaching to other people and what they read in astrology and what they read in divination and cards and things like that. And the reason why it's so powerful and why people believe it so intensely is because of the kinds of experiences that they tend to have. Myself, for example, I had a lot of supernatural experiences growing up and as an adult as well. So trying to make sense of these things was what led me into mediumship in the first place. And then once I got into it, I was able to know things that are impossible for me to know about other people, and I would be able to predict some things, although I have to say the future is one of those things that most tarot readers and people like that cannot actually predict. Usually the information that I had was about people's past and about their current situation and insight into the people that they were and the people that they were involved in. So how did I become privy to this sort of information if it wasn't something that I actually was able to research? Because I literally just met these people. I didn't have their last name. I didn't know them from a bar of soap. I just did a reading. Well, in the New Age, you're taught that you have what's called spirit guides, or at least one spirit guide. And in Christianity, that would be referred to as a familiar spirit. The reason why it's called a familiar spirit is because often people inherit them from their ancestors. These entities have been around with their family line for generations because of the pagan practices that they were performing. And my family was pretty pagan. So it's not really the person that knows things. It's not really the person that gets these flashes of insight. And it's not really the person that like picks out the cards or anything like that. There's spirits involved, and these spirits whisper in the ears of the psychics and the tarot readers and the mediums. And having encountered these beings for a number of years, and then having essentially the mask ripped off at one point, I know for a fact that they like to cause chaos, and they like to cause trouble in people's lives, and they enjoy watching people suffer. Our misery is entertainment for them. They also tend to be quite parasitic. They like to feed off of human energy. They particularly love negative feelings, feelings like fear, anger, sadness. These are all emotions that they enjoy, and it gives them life in many respects. Their parasitic nature is actually quite similar to people who are very narcissistic. And often you'll find parallels between evil entities and scammers. They usually need to convince people that they have more power and more insight than what they actually do. They have some, and they like to wow people with it so that they draw people in. But at the end of the day, they don't really have much, especially not compared to God. But one of the scams that they like to run is incarnation and reincarnation. And they like to tell people that, you know, you're going to come back again, so it doesn't really matter what you do here. And when it comes to things like the twin flame scenario, there's a heavy emphasis on the past lives. So it's kind of like implanting memories in people. There's a lot of hypnosis techniques when it comes to like past life regressions. So it's kind of like creating a false history that you have with another person that never happened, and you don't really know them. You just think you know them because of this fantasy. That being said, Jeff and Shalia and the Twin Flames universe is a whole new level that I never saw in the New Age. I never saw anyone go to the lengths that these people go to. I've never seen any practitioner randomly pair people up just to get them to spend money. There's also very few practitioners who I've ever seen who would ever encourage the people that come to them for advice and for readings and for past life regressions and things like that. Pretty much no one that I've ever heard of before who would ever encourage someone to stalk and harass a person that they believe is their twin flame. And yet in the documentary, one of the people that they interviewed was actually brave enough to talk about the situation that she got herself into, where she was told by Jeff and Shalia that her twin flame was an ex of hers. And when she tried to rekindle the relationship, he decided to take out a restraining order. And then the group and the leaders of the group encouraged her to violate the terms of the restraining order and to keep contacting this person, sending him messages. And then eventually she showed up, she says accidentally, and I think it was accidentally, at a place that he happened to be. And because of the prior history of her ignoring the restraining order and contacting him continuously, he called the police, and she spent a month in jail. And after her stint in jail, rather than, you know, saying to her, okay, well, maybe it's time to move on, when she had a Zoom call with Jeff and Shalia, Jeff actually praised her for stalking her ex. Because of the whole system of reincarnation and the belief in multiple lifetimes with another person, most psychics and readers will not encourage someone who is not on good terms with their twin flame to necessarily stress about it or to pursue it in any like active way. They will most often just say, maybe not this lifetime. According to some of the mythology of twin flames, not everyone is going to be in a romantic relationship with their twin flame in any given lifetime, and so you never know what cycle your soul is on at the time. Of course, I don't actually believe this now. I believed it back then, or at least I entertained the idea of it back then. But now that I have encountered God personally, and he delivered me from the spirits that were causing me a whole bunch of trouble, I do believe what it says in the Bible. And just as it is appointed for man to die once, and after that comes judgment, so Christ, having been offered once to bear the sins of many, will appear a second time, not to deal with sin, but to save those who are eagerly waiting for him. So I believe in Judgment Day. I believe what the Bible says about people dying once, and then they essentially go into soul sleep. So there's currently nobody in hell, because hell is for Judgment Day, when people will find out, whether they made it or not. There's no very good or reliable evidence that reincarnation is a real thing. And for me, honestly, it just sounds like another one of the scams that evil spirits like to suck people into. It's something that could potentially give people false hope. And if you've ever delved into the sick, twisted world of Teal Swan, who is another New Age teacher, then you'll know her history with advising people that self-deletion is a reset button, which is, of course, awful. So there are New Age teachers out there who encourage people to end it all. In terms of false hopes, I would say that many psychic readers out there do encourage false hope when it comes to this twin flame relationship that some people think that they're in. This has been happening for a lot longer than Jeff and Shalia. They're pretty new to the game. They're just an extreme version of it. So in the Twin Flames universe, Jeff and Shalia will say something like, marriage is not a barrier for a relationship. So if your twin flame is already married to someone else, then you can just ignore that and you can trample all over other people's boundaries, in the same way that they encouraged the lady that was part of their group to stalk someone who had a restraining order on her. So in this article from themselves, they talk about violating the boundaries of other people's marriages. So this article from the Twin Flames Universe website is called "What If My Twin Flame is Married to Another?" And it starts with, "Your twin flame is unhappily married to someone else." It's kind of a very presumptive statement to make. One of the biggest issues with people who believe in twin flames is that they often project a lot of their own desires and delusions onto an object of their own infatuation. So it's not necessarily real, and articles like this can play into those delusions. Anyway, I won't bore you with the details of this whole article because it just tosses around a whole bunch of word salad that doesn't really mean anything, and they're pretty much just telling people what they want to hear about a person that they're obsessed with. So towards the end, we encounter this juicy, flaming hot garbage, which says, "Everything you do for love is always a win-win situation for everyone." And it says, "If you or your twin flame are married outside your union, but you desire to be together, you have to go for it. You can't live an unlived life. You can't walk on this planet knowing your twin flame is out there and not be together." But wait for this, guys. You won't believe how they reframe cheating in this article. They say, "It's also selfish not to free up your twin flame's spouse. After all, they too have their own twin flame union, which would be most beneficial for them as well." Can you believe how kind these people are? They're even thinking of the other person who's being cheated on. They really want what's best for them, which is to be cheated on and to lose their marriage. They're just so thoughtful, so considerate, so kind. Oh my goodness, no one has ever thought about the other spouse quite as much as they have. Really, they're actually doing them a massive favor. This is good for them. Anyway, the article goes on to say, what if there's a nasty divorce? Jeff and Shalia have personally worked with many twin flames who have been in marriages or whose twin flames have been in marriages. In every single case, they have seen that the non-twin flame marriage falls apart effortlessly when the person isn't married to their twin flame. It's not a hard, horrible divorce. It's actually an easy, simple, and positive process for everyone involved. The dissolution of marriage is no small thing, but if you're doing it for spirit, for higher love, then it's easy because it is always absolutely supported. Ugh. Sorry, I just threw up in my mouth a little bit there. Anyway, you don't need to worry about whether your twin flame is married or not, because by choosing your ultimate lover, you realize that's your partner. So you don't have to share them with anyone, and you don't have to wait until they decide to finish their other relationship. You need to simply choose to be with your ultimate lover. Waiting for your twin flame is an illusion, because you're basically waiting for yourself. It's never ever about them. So don't fret about your marriage or your spouse. How can you fear when love is calling you to do the right thing? If your heart is calling for your twin flame, then nothing can stand between you two. Nothing at all. And then we have this stellar quote from the gurus that says, "Only love is real, and love never fails." Realistically, it depends on how you define love, and it seems like their definition is pretty messed up. I promise the torture is almost over. We just have to finish with this last bit that says that people are not homewreckers for literally homewrecking. So it says, it can be difficult to grapple with the guilt and self-judgment that comes from decades of conditioning about what marriage really is. Marriage, is that the thing where you promise to not abandon someone and you promise to stick with them for life? That marriage? Anyway, let's just gloss over that for the time being. They continue to say, "We found it is most helpful to have the nurturing support of a community of delusional cheaters. People that intimately know the sanctity of your twin flame union and have walked along the paths of many like you. The process of moving from a non-twin flame relationship towards your twin flame union will spark different feelings in you. Some of them might not be the most comfortable ones, which is why we highly encourage receiving all the support you can have and being told exactly what you want to hear from people who will charge you a small sum of thousands." Just to give you some comparison, this is an article from another New Age teacher about, what to do if your twin flame is already married to someone else. So this article from Subconscious Servant is by Alan Young, and it says, "The fact that your twin flame is married is a tough situation, but it can be made easier if you know how to manage it. Remember that your twin has chosen this person for a reason, and they are not an obstacle to your happiness. The most important thing is to stay true to yourself and don't let jealousy cloud your judgment. Here's what to do if you're asking what to do if my twin flame is married to someone else." Again, I won't go through all the details of this article, but there's a couple of points here. Number 10, realize you'll connect once again once your twin flame is ready. The most important thing when you're in this situation is to realize that there is a reason for it. No matter how much it hurts, your twin flame being married doesn't mean they don't love you or are done with you. It just means that they aren't ready to be with you yet. They may not even know what the reason is, but there's a reason for everything, and working on yourself can help you connect with them again when they're ready. And number 13, stop worrying too much. No matter what you do, you can't make your twin flame come out of their marriage, and no matter how much your own marriage might suffer in the process, it won't help if you spend all of your time worrying about theirs. The universe has a plan for both of you, and there is nothing that any of us can do to change that. Don't waste your energy trying to change your twin flame's mind or break up their marriage. So as you can see, this article isn't exactly great advice because it's still not really telling people to not hold out hope for someone who is already in a relationship. However, it does try to deter people from becoming homewreckers, so it's at least better than the twin flames universe, which actually does give that advice. And here is a second article just to reiterate that Jeff and Shalia are abnormal even in the New Age community, which is already not great. But this article is 17 Things to Keep in Mind If Your Twin Flame Married Someone Else by apparently Tina Fey. I didn't know she was into this, but yeah, there you go. So it says, if your twin flame married someone else, it's not a sign that they don't love you and that they don't want to be with you. Although realistically, it should be a sign that they don't love you and they shouldn't be with you. Anyway, every one of us has done things in our lives that we wish we could take back, but your twin flame isn't doing the same because they want to hurt you. Your twin flame is married to someone else for a reason, and you need to respect that reason. If they're not ready to leave their spouse, then try to be patient and understand that they're doing what they think is right for them. It's impossible to know exactly what your twin flame is going through, so don't pretend you're an expert and judge them unfairly. The idea of your twin flame marrying someone else can be a difficult thing for you to accept, but it's important that you try to understand their decision and the reasons behind it. If they're still married to someone else, then you might be feeling a little sad, lonely, and maybe even angry. But don't worry, there's a good chance that they're just doing their due diligence and playing it safe. Here are 17 things that twin flame seekers should keep in mind if their soulmate is married to someone else. Again, we're not going through the whole article. We're just going to have a look at the bits that say, you know what? Don't interfere in someone else's relationship, maybe. So number 17, you deserve a chance of your own. You might have your heart set on getting married to your twin flame and you might still be trying to convince them to end their marriage. But that doesn't give you the right to convince someone else their partner is no good for them. So if you want to keep trying, then you're going to have to accept that you can't control other people's lives. You have to be patient and accept that you might try things that don't work out. And final thoughts, if you're a twin flame seeker and your soulmate is married to someone else, then you need to be aware of the steps they might be taking to keep everything going smoothly. If they love you, then they'll do everything in their power that doesn't hurt you in order for them to make their relationship work with you. Hopefully you should now have a good idea of the 17 things to keep in mind if your twin flame married someone else. But if you'd still like to get more clarity on the situation, speaking to a gifted advisor is the best way to go. And here we get to the hard sell, where essentially you're supposed to hire a psychic to help you navigate this stuff. So as you can see, like, the New Age doesn't have particularly high standards when it comes to, you know, keeping your promises and respecting other people's relationships. But Jeff and Shalia take it to a whole new low. They have no problem with encouraging people to break up marriages if it means that they get the results that they want. And so a lot of their advice is extremely self-centered, disrespectful, and cruel. In the New Age, it really does depend on the kind of teacher that you get as to what sort of quality of message that you're receiving. So some teachers will advocate for more healthy relationships, and they will discourage people from doing things that are very unhealthy for themselves and for the other person. But Jeff and Shalia have no such standards for themselves or for their followers. And part of the documentary was a girl who was talking about a relationship that they kind of encouraged her into, kind of somewhat pressured her into. So she was 19. She was actually still a teenager when she was part of their group, and this guy who was about 30 slid into her DMs and was sort of chatting her up, and the group was all for it. So they didn't really see any problem with a stranger on the internet who was 30 chatting up a 19-year-old girl. So that was red flag number 1. Red flag number 2 was when, during a Zoom meeting that they were having, she actually told them that the guy that she was talking to was on probation. So he was unable to leave the state that he was living in order to go and meet her in the state that she lived in. And rather than saying, oh, hey, this guy has a criminal record, maybe you should proceed with caution, instead they were encouraging her to go and live with him in another state. Let me say this again. A 19-year-old girl who has not really experienced the world very much, I think this might have been her first relationship, is being encouraged to go and live with a 30-year-old man in another state who she's never met before, who has a criminal record. As you can imagine, the relationship did not go very well, and she actually eventually reported to the group that she was suffering physical abuse. So this is another situation where the person involved was suffering at the hands of a partner. You know, they were experiencing intimate partner violence. And instead of getting help from the group to get out of the situation, the victim was being blamed for the situation and being told that she was not providing what this person wanted in the way of a relationship, and that she needed to change for this other person. I actually found an article by someone who also used to be part of the New Age and who got heavily involved in the twin flame idea. The article by Julia Lara Shea back in 2021, called Escaping the Twin Flame Cybercult, says, if you look at the so-called twin flame stages, they are disturbingly identical to those of a narcissistically abusive relationship, only using quote-unquote spiritual terms. She provides a warning that the article may be triggering for people, but she also insists that it is very important to talk about these things. She also admits that she was sucked into the cult mentality for about 5 years. She writes, as I began to dig deeper, I came across the work of Underground Star, and the plot thickened. In her video, The Indoctrination into the Twin Flame Cult, she explains that whilst there is no specific cult leader, the twin flame belief system is self-taught and then sustained by the individual through the incessant watching of tarot readings, energy updates, YouTube videos, and astrology love readings. There are also a plethora of Facebook support groups and a variety of different coaching and healing programs offered to the collective at a premium price. Thus, the internet plays an enormous part in both the indoctrination process and keeping people hooked into the twin flame matrix. One of the main issues is that the industry is highly unregulated, and anyone can start claiming to be a quote-unquote twin flame expert and sell a variety of services and products in order to support you on the path to sacred union. I am ashamed to admit that I was amongst this cohort during my involvement in the cult. I wrote numerous articles about twin flames, began offering coaching services, and hosted a Facebook support group. I have since permanently deleted and withdrawn all of my associated content and services. The unfortunate truth is that the twin flame concept is a lie, a false concept that may have at one point some truth to it, but it has since been overly romanticized and bastardized to exploit our traumas, fears, and conditioning. It provides a false promise of a happily ever after with our true soulmate, with whom we will embark on a predestined soul mission to help uplift the planet with our eternal unconditional love. I'm sorry, but what a load of bollocks. If you are reading this feeling a surge of anger, confusion, and or resistance, then you are likely still entrenched in the twin flame cult ideology, and may be holding on to the hope that your knight, or empress in shining armor, will eventually proclaim his/her undying love for you and offer you the fairy tale romance and validation you have been desperately seeking. I hate to tell you, but the brutal truth is that this is most likely not going to happen. As my predecessors explained, the relationship you have with your so-called twin flame is more than likely not a sacred connection, but rather a narcissistic dynamic in which you have been subjected to repeated emotional abuse. If you look at the so-called twin flame stages, they are disturbingly identical to those of a narcissistically abusive relationship, only using spiritual terms. What is referred to as the bubble love stage and the crisis stages in twin flame speak is actually the idealization, devaluation, and discard stages of a narcissistic relationship. After the discard stage of the narcissistic relationship, when your so-called twin abandons or rejects you in some way, often to pursue another relationship whether you are aware of it or not, you start to Google for answers to explain what you have just experienced, and lo and behold, the twin flame dynamic is often one of the first things that pop up. From there, you are immediately hooked as a series of articles, tarot readings, and YouTube videos flood your subconscious mind, programming you with this new false belief system that appears to describe your experience down to a T. So the article highlights the fact that the stages of the twin flame relationship are very similar to the phases of a narcissistically abusive relationship. So let's have a look at the stages of the twin flame relationship according to Cosmopolitan. So this is the Cosmopolitan article on the 7 stages of finding your twin flame because, Cosmo is the most healthy thing you can possibly read. So they say, once you've found your twin flame, not the same thing as a soulmate, FYI, get ready to embark on a real emotional ride. This type of relationship isn't as cut and dried as finding your soulmate and living happily ever after. In fact, twin flame partnerships are known for being somewhat tumultuous. When it comes to the stages of finding your twin flame, experts argue on how many there are, but these 5 to 7 are common. So whether you're in the throes of a twin flame relationship or you've got a feeling the universe is about to intro you to the love of your life and you want to prep, here are the 7 ups and downs of a twin flame relationship. And notice how relatable this article is with their language, how they abbreviate everything and they use all these cool slang words and stuff. It's very insidious. So according to the article, the first phase is preparing to meet your twin flame. And this is basically a description of someone who is lonely and looking for love, but it's been spiritualized into this feeling that the universe has someone for you and it's just around the corner, but you've got this yearning. And yeah, it's called being lonely. Anyway, stage 2 is the awakening, meeting your twin flame. Now, it's totally possible you've already met your twin flame, explains Chris Plains, I'm not sure how to say his name, founder of datingscout.com, and that seems like a trustworthy source. But this is the stage when you'd start to feel as though you're really falling for this person. Falling for them would be the easiest thing to do, but be careful, explains Plains. This might not last long because these kinds of relationships are prone to inner turmoil and separation. And this is the person giving dating advice. Mary J. Gibson, relationship expert at Dating XP, because that's also a good source to go to, also refers to this period as the awakening, when your relationship is filled with coincidences and everything about you two may feel like destiny. You're going OTT with how compatible you two are. This writer is so down with the lingo. Stage number 3, the conflict or the test. Welp, the honeymoon period is over. Here is when things start to get a little tricky. Since your twin flame is a mirror of yourself, this is when you might start to find some traits of your twin flame to be kinda irksome. Maybe you don't like that they're super emotionally withholding without realizing that you yourself are like that sometimes. Yes, let's blame ourselves for a person who is emotionally withdrawn in a relationship. Or perhaps they call out your behavior first. Either way, you or your partner will be the one discovering unlikable traits which will trigger the feeling of anxiety, which might rock the relationship, Plains explains. Stage 4, the crisis. In any relationship, problems are unavoidable. This stage is meant to stress test how you and your twin flame handle yourselves in a tough situation. This phase can be a catalyst for a deeper bond, says Gibson. Plains adds that the conflicts that arise during this stage and how you solve them will ensure how long your relationship will last. Number 5, the chase. This is where separation occurs, although it might not be a permanent separation. Twin flame relationships are notorious for being on and off. Yeah, because that's a healthy relationship, right? This stage is inevitable and will arise no matter how you worked through the previous stage, says Gibson. So yeah, this is one of the hallmarks of a twin flame relationship, is that you will break up at least once, if not numerous times. So you got to ask yourself, how stable and healthy is this sort of relationship? The article continues, one of the twin flames will keep distancing themselves, which will result in a push and pull dynamic that eventually must come to an end, aka a separation. One cannot keep chasing and the other cannot keep running forever, adds Gibson. Yeah, this sounds exactly like a toxic, narcissistic, abusive relationship. Stage number 6, relenting/the surrender. I wonder if this has anything to do with learned helplessness. Anyway, it says, say goodbye to your ego because you've got some growing to do. This time apart from your twin flame is when you're supposed to grow your soul and reflect upon your time spent together, says Plains. The need to control has to be given up, explains Gibson. Surrendering doesn't mean giving up on the connection, but accepting that destiny can't be escaped. Or perhaps the other person is just wielding an excessive amount of control and manipulation. Just a thought. Anyway, it's not necessarily goodbye forever though. Plains says that if you do eventually come across your twin flame again, the time you spent reflecting during this phase will help you improve as a person, because you absolutely need to improve as a person, because that's why the other person rejected you, right? This stage should be seen as a positive, allowing you and your twin flame to be released from the past and encouraging you both to live more consciously in the moment, or at least to not question another person when they treat you badly in a relationship, right? And finally, number 7 is the reunion. While everyone isn't even lucky enough to come across their twin flame in this lifetime, you're even luckier if you're able to reunite with your twin flame after having gone through the journey above, explains Plains. If you focus your energies toward improving yourself in order to meet your twin flame halfway, then it's most likely that you'll be able to reconnect. Once you do, you'll have a union of mind, body, and soul, a perfect trifecta some can't even begin to imagine. And this is exactly the kind of false hope and false promises that keep people hooked into abusive, narcissistic relationships. As someone studying psychology, I can't even begin to tell you how many red flags I can see in this article, and they're talking about it in such a glib, frothy, fluffy way, as though it's just like not that significant in people's lives. Like, are they high? Anyway, it finishes up by saying, this stage means balance is restored, says Gibson. You'll take the lessons from the tough times to better understand each other and your love. This stage is all about acceptance, peace, and reciprocal understanding. If you're given the chance to reunite with your twin flame, you better never let him go again. Yeah, so the writer of Cosmo did say that there was a lot of drama involved, and I would just say that, it sounds incredibly toxic. Okay, so to give us a bit of a comparison between the two, we're going to have a look at a Psychology Today article which outlines the abuse cycle in narcissistic relationships. The article titled The Narcissistic Cycle of Abuse is by Dr. Parkin, and the subheading says the cycle of abuse theory can be applied to narcissists' abusive relationships. So the key points are the 1979 cycle of abuse theory can be adapted to fit relationships in which one partner is high in narcissism. Covert narcissists and female narcissists may be more likely to utilize a cycle of abuse in order to stay in control, and learned helplessness is a major reason why victims stay in abusive relationships. The cycle of abuse is a theory conceptualized in 1979 by Lenore Walker that identifies continual repeated events in an abusive relationship. It was originally established as a means of contextualizing violent incidents against women in romantic relationships. The cycle of abuse includes 4 stages or steps. Number 1, tension. Number 2, incident. Number 3, reconciliation/honeymoon. And number 4, calm. The cycle of abuse coincides with intimate partner violence, or IPV. Since its conception, researchers have adapted the original cycle of abuse theory to expand to all genders, ages, relationships, and forms of abuse. A relationship does not need to be physically violent to be considered abusive or harmful. Emotional, spiritual, and psychological abuse can be just as damaging to the human psyche as physical abuse. IPV has been linked to narcissistic relationships in the facets of emotional and psychological abuse as well as physical abuse. Additionally, research has found that covert narcissists and female narcissists are more likely to utilize a cycle of abuse in order to stay in control. Yeah, it's a very passive-aggressive kind of methodology. Manipulation, control, and relationships. Individuals with narcissistic personality disorder and those with strong narcissistic tendencies can be very manipulating and controlling individuals. Keep in mind that it is possible to have narcissistic traits and not have diagnosable narcissistic personality disorder, which is a clinically rare occurrence. Yeah, it's probably way more common to come across people who have narcissistic traits rather than a full-blown personality disorder, but I can tell you now that they are not pleasant to be around and toxic to be in a relationship with. When it comes to any type of relationship requiring honesty, transparency, and genuine emotion, highly narcissistic individuals are often unable to keep up with the charade for very long. This exhaustion of pretending to be an equal partner is what typically precedes the narcissistic cycle of abuse. In many cases, relationships are meant to serve the purpose of pleasing the narcissistic individual, keeping them in the entitled role they believe they deserve, with the admiration and perks that go along with the role. They may believe they are never responsible for things going wrong, and may struggle or seem entirely unable to empathize with another person's pain unless that pain is affecting them directly. Narcissists tend to have a fragile ego that is reliant on external influences. The more they have, or the more they are perceived to have, equates to their self-worth. Highly narcissistic individuals may seem to have a picture-perfect life, a big house, happy family portraits, a shiny new car, enviable vacations. Beyond those external trappings, however, may be a quiet, hidden pattern of emotional abuse that never stops cycling. A constant push and pull dynamic. Oh, where have we heard that before? That sounds very familiar. A constant push and pull dynamic that can eventually cause the victim to develop learned helplessness. Ah, where have we heard that before? Sounds very much like the Cosmopolitan article. Learned helplessness, in which they feel trapped and unable to leave the relationship. Some studies have shown that vulnerable narcissists who are hypersensitive to rejection and crave social validation may be more prone to utilizing the cycle of emotional abuse rather than physical abuse or coercion, which is kind of what they already told us. The narcissistic cycle of abuse. The original cycle of abuse's 4 steps can be adapted to fit narcissistic relationships. Just as physical violence is not only perpetrated by one gender, narcissistic abuse is unisex. Instead of using fists or smashing bottles to hurt someone high in narcissism tends to use gossip and lies to mar the victim's reputation. This person may use whatever means necessary to keep their partner in line and themselves in control of the narrative. Even if they are called out on their lies and smear campaign, the narcissist may state that the victim deserved it. The narcissistic cycle of abuse, Figure 1 below, illustrates the 4 parts of the cycle. It is important to understand that there is no first or last step of the cycle, as it is a continuous pattern with no clear beginning or end. Rather, the narcissistic cycle of abuse is how narcissistic individuals exploit their partners into doing what they demand and force them to ebb and flow according to the narcissist's whims. The 4 stages of the narcissistic cycle of abuse are based on Walker's stages. Like Walker's cycle of abuse, the narcissistic cycle can begin or end at any stage and continue on. Stage 1, defining event. The defining event is not so much the crisis, oh, that sounds familiar, doesn't it? But instead often refers to an outburst on the part of the narcissist. This may be an actual fight, argument, or even just a simple miscommunication. The crisis can be real or imagined. No matter what the reason is for the drama, even a minuscule inconvenience, in this scenario, the narcissist finds a reason to explode. The narcissist may have started to feel as if they were losing control of a situation or a person, and thus has to cause an issue to bring attention back to themselves. Yeah, so this isn't some spiritual path where you have to dismantle your own ego because this abusive person is mirroring your own toxic traits. No, this is literally a narcissist who is losing control and they're trying to wrangle it back from you by any means necessary. And the whole issue of control is an illusion in their delusional mind anyway. Stage 2, regaining control. Ooh, this also sounds slightly familiar. Even if the person high in narcissism is to blame for the crisis or problem, it may be that the victim ends up being apologetic. The defining event often shifts the power back to the narcissist and places the blame squarely on the victim. the victim may end up apologizing due to either learned helplessness or simply to keep the peace. Learned helplessness may be a major reason behind the continuation of the cycle of narcissistic abuse. The partners of narcissists often confuse fear with love and thus may do anything to keep the peace. Fear, abuse, intimidation, and exploitation are not love and should never be confused with affection. Yeah, usually the type of fear that a victim is feeling isn't necessarily for their own safety. It's fear of losing the relationship. It's fear of being rejected, of being abandoned, and it's constantly communicated to them from the narcissist that they could be rejected at any moment. Stage 3, peace and quiet. This would probably be in the twin flame dynamic, the reunion phase, when apparently they have peace and perfect love. But it says in this article, the cooling down period may seem peaceful on the outside, but on the inside, the victim may be constantly scrambling to make it up to the narcissist. The narcissist may further manipulate the situation to reflect positively on them and negatively on the victim. Gaslighting is also extremely common during this period, and the narcissist may construct an entirely new narrative about the problem. Life is peaceful as long as the narcissist has their way and is the center of attention. And stage 4, the tension build-up. Over time, the narcissist will begin to lose control of a narrative, another person, or a situation. Life has been continuing quietly and normally, but even the victim begins to get uncomfortable with the peace. Tension starts to build out of the victim's fear of the narcissist and the narcissist's fear of losing control. It's only a matter of time before the narcissist explodes by creating drama and exploiting a minor issue. Then begins another cycle of the push-pull relationship dynamic and imbalance of power. And this sounds exactly like a twin flame dynamic. And just to give you some perspective, the article also has healthy versus toxic relationships. All relationships go through natural cycles of peace and conflict. It is inevitable that a couple will have to face major life disasters beyond their control, as well as interpersonal crises. However, the difference between normal and abuse cycles is the level of respect for each other and the balance of power. It is entirely possible to face a crisis together and not destroy each other in the process of rebuilding and healing. Another difference between normal cycles of relationships and abusive cycles is actually solving the problem and working together to avoid pitfalls in the future. And yeah, that's exactly it. Basically, it's either someone working with you or someone constantly working against you to exert power and control. As you can see, both types of relationships are hallmarked by drama and contention and a lack of security and a lack of respect for at least one person in the relationship. Both types of relationships can involve quite a bit of infidelity, involving things like love triangles or even love squares. If you're in a narcissistically abusive relationship and you go to a fully trained and qualified counselor for help, then that person will encourage you to look after yourself and to find safety. Whereas if you are in a twin flame relationship and you go to a psychic or a tarot reader, they might give you completely opposite advice. They might tell you to stick it out and to just be more accepting of this person and to see this as an opportunity to work on your karma. And it just kind of seems like the New Age spiritual movement has a very twisted definition of love in the first place, because how could you look at this sort of treatment and think that it's healthy or think that it is like the epitome of an example of love? Like, they're not even talking about, oh, this person is designed to challenge you. No, it's not that. This person is the ultimate lover. And it's very similar to narcissistic people, because narcissistic people will tell you that they love you and then their behavior makes a complete lie out of that word. So someone who is in a narcissistically abusive relationship will constantly be dealing with cognitive dissonance, Because on the one hand, they're told that they are loved, and then on the other hand, it's completely contradicted by the evidence. And this sort of cognitive dissonance can lead to someone developing what's called limerence. So what is limerence? Well, I have a peer-reviewed article for us to have a look at. So this is a medical journal article called Treatment of Limerence Using a Cognitive Behavioral Approach, a case study. So usually in peer-reviewed journals, what you get is an introduction of the subject, so they sort of explain what limerence is, and then they go into the experiment of the treatment that they use for this particular case study. But the abstract says, limerence is an under-researched condition of unknown prevalence that causes significant loss of productivity and emotional distress to sufferers. Individuals with limerence display an obsessive attachment to a particular person or limerent object, LO, that interferes with daily functioning and the formation and maintenance of healthy relationships. The current study proposes a conceptualization of the condition in a 28-year-old individual and describes a treatment approach using cognitive behavioral techniques, most notably exposure-responsive prevention as used in the treatment of obsessive-compulsive disorder. The number and type of compulsive rituals performed by the treated individual were notably decreased at 9-month follow-up after treatment, and a subjective assessment of dysfunctional thought patterns related to the LO also suggested improvement. A novel screening instrument is presented as validated screening instruments do not yet exist. Implications for diagnosis and treatment are discussed. Psychologist Dorothy Tenov coined the term limerence in the early 1970s after conducting over 300 interviews to gather qualitative data on the experience of romantic love. Tenov noted a particular manifestation of being in love that many of her interviewees described in a similar way, an involuntary, overwhelming longing for another person's attention and positive regard. This attachment was typically unrequited, developing for someone unavailable to reciprocate feelings. Uncertainty is the driving force behind the development and maintenance of limerence. The individual experiencing limerence feels an attraction towards a particular limerent object, LO, whose willingness to reciprocate is uncertain. The greater the degree of uncertainty, the more intensely the individual ruminates about the LO, and the greater the desire for reciprocation. This pattern of uncertainty about the LO's feelings and availability may distinguish limerence from the early stages of a typical romantic relationship, in which both partners often experience infatuation or obsession with each other. Individuals experiencing limerence struggle with near constant rumination about the LO. They may also engage in rituals that interfere with their other responsibilities, such as staring at photos of the LO or repeatedly reading messages from them. And I would personally interject here that one of the symptoms of limerence is watching a whole bunch of tarot readings about what the person might be thinking or feeling without actually talking to the person. It goes on to say, frequently the sufferer mentally replays past interactions with the LO, searching for indications of how the LO might feel towards them. When the LO shows affection or approval, the limerent individual's mood soars to ecstatic, and in the face of actual or perceived disapproval, the mood plummets to despair. So it's quite an emotional roller coaster, extreme highs and extreme lows. And I would say that this is very similar to the twin flame dynamic as far as we're often told and it's often portrayed. Watkin and Vo furthered Tenov's work with a proposed model of limerence that drew parallels with both obsessive-compulsive disorder, OCD, and substance use disorder, SUD, yet distinguished it as a unique condition. Due to the presence of both intrusive thoughts and compulsive rituals, individuals experiencing limerence may meet diagnostic criteria for OCD if these thoughts and rituals cause significant distress and impairment in functioning. Watkin and Vo further noted that separation from the LO results in withdrawal symptoms such as pain in the chest or abdomen, sleep disturbance, irritability, and depression. Additionally, the compulsive behavior that accompanies limerence is reminiscent of a substance use disorder, namely the amount of time that is spent planning for and gaining access to the LO, even when the limerent individual is fully aware of the negative effects of this behavior. By the way, guys, I am so sorry about the banging in the background. right outside the window where I'm recording is a fence, which is loose, and it's extremely windy today, so it's just banging constantly. And if I want to get this recorded and out, I just have to ignore it. Continuing on. Fisher al. further assert that romantic love may itself be a form of addiction, because brain scanning has revealed that feelings of intense romantic love involve the same regions of the brain, referred to as the reward center, that are also activated in behavioral addictions, for example, gambling and SUD. Tenov reported that limerent episodes may occur just once in a person's life, or sequentially for a series of different limerent objects. Each episode may last for a few weeks or for decades, with the average episode lasting between 18 months and 3 years. Individuals of all ages and genders may be affected, and the LO is not necessarily of the same gender to which the individual is sexually attracted, implying that limerence is distinct from sexual attraction. As Tenov notes, sex is neither essential nor in itself adequate to satisfy the limerent need. Limerence is a desire for more than sex. Clinical descriptions of the course and treatment of limerence are extremely scarce outside of Tenov's seminal book and Wilmot and Bentley's more recent work. Therefore, in the absence of established diagnostic criteria and treatment protocols for limerence, clinicians may reasonably use evidence-based treatment for OCD, most notably exposure response prevention, to treat an individual presenting with limerence. ERP is a behavioral therapy that involves deliberately exposing an individual to a feared stimulus and preventing the individual from engaging in rituals that alleviate the anxiety. In the case of limerence, one may imagine the feared stimulus as separation from or rejection by the LO. And I would say in terms of treatment, if people are addicted to tarot readings as a way of perpetuating their addiction to this other person, then they need to stop watching these things and they need to go cold turkey on that stuff. I would say that many people who are under the impression that they are on a twin flame journey are people who are suffering from limerence. If you look at what it says about compulsive behaviors and little rituals when it comes to sustaining the delusion of a relationship with this person, you can kind of see the parallels with people watching and listening to a lot of tarot readings and getting absolutely obsessed with, knowing the future with their twin flame and wanting to know if it's going to work out. And unfortunately, the tarot readings and things like that give them this false hope that this is real and that it's not just in their head, and they're not projecting their own delusions and fantasies onto an object of limerence. So rather than being helped to move on and being helped to let go of this unhealthy and fantasy-based relationship, instead they are encouraged to keep doing it. And, they can waste years of their lives on this thing. They could waste decades potentially. So as someone who used to be a New Age practitioner, who used to do tarot readings for people, who saw a lot of tarot readings online where people were constantly talking about twin flames, and my studies in psychology and just observing this movement in general, I would say that there are a number of reasons why the twin flame idea is very appealing to some people at some moments in their life. There's the limerence aspect, where people are encouraged to have this sort of strange view of love, where you become absolutely obsessed with someone who doesn't reciprocate your feelings, and you're just encouraged to live in a fantasy and a delusion. And then there are people who are so used to narcissistically abusive relationships and trauma bonding that they don't really see that this is unhealthy. They think that this is like the epitome of love. And then there are people who are just naive. They don't know that much about love, like the 19-year-old girl who got sucked into it because she didn't really know what she was getting herself into, and she didn't know how to advocate for herself either. So she was looking to this community of adults to give her some guidance and to give her some support and to tell her, you know, what should she do. And they just completely steered her wrong. So in short, I would say that people are lied to. They're lied to not just by someone like Jeff or Shalia. They're lied to by a whole movement, a whole spiritual concept. They're lied to by Hollywood. They're lied to by so many different external factors, telling them that this sort of toxic romance is the best that you can hope for. And at the end of the day, someone gets harmed, and it's either the person who has gone down this rabbit hole, or it's the object of their obsession who becomes harmed. Jeff and Shalia are promoting a dangerous fantasy, and they are enriching themselves through it in the process. But they are by no means unique or new or different, really. They might be the worst of a bunch, but they are part of a culture that has a lot of problems with it. And I know that because I was part of that culture, and I contributed to the suffering of other people. And that is something I deeply regret. So the best I can do to try and rectify the mistakes of my past is to provide people with the insight and the information that I wish I had found back then, and to just be a different voice from the echo chamber of the new age. And hopefully it helps someone. So thank you all for listening. Hopefully this did help someone. And if you have your own experiences or your own thoughts on the subject, leave it in the comments. Like the video, share it with people if you think they need it. And don't forget to subscribe if you're new. And then we'll see you next time. Bye.